Should we? So this is probably a good. Before we even get to all that,
sorry, I just had to explain myself.
No, please. We'll give you plenty of time to address
the comments.
What's a recession?
Well, what do you think it is?
I have been told and taught that a recession technically is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP.
But that's because Ben went to school in London. And no.
I went to Cal State Long Beach.
But for some reason he has this British ass recession definition.
And normally I would just carry myself away into a very bad British.
Okay, so I'm on the edge of my seat. What is a recession?
Yeah, me
actually?
too.
Well, so a lot of people think it's 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, but that's not true. I think somebody said that was made up by a professor, but basically if you go to Inber, who is the definer of recessions, they say it's a prolonged period of a decline in economic activity. So it can be anywhere from like a month, which it was in March of 2020, or it can be anywhere from a while, like it was in 2008. So it's not necessarily 2 quarters. It's a longer time frame than that, or it can be shorter. So like they look at like depth, duration, all that stuff, and they look at a bunch of different economic indicators to determine if a recession is happening.
What are some of those economic indicators?
Like personal income outlays, like different payrolls, like things like that. So basically how the economy is doing. Yeah. Like it's a bunch of different metrics. And it's kind of funny because they definitely do it based off vibes. Because if you go to the website, they're like, sometimes we look at these metrics and sometimes we look at other metrics. And
well, that was, so when I was looking at it last night, I was like, it feels very,
fluffy.
A lot more nebulous than you would imagine.
Yeah.
And and it just kind of reminds me of the, everyone was it Cardi B? She had the tweet of like, are we in a recession? And I think it's like, well, we don't quite know when we'll actually hit it, I guess, until they tell us.
Yeah. Well, like we have some estimates coming out, I think in a week for, Q2 GDP. But the reason that we had a negative print in GDP in the first quarter was because like inventory data was super wacky. And so like because of the pandemic, everything has been sort of thrown off course. And if you look at the GDP data from the first quarter, demand was still really strong. Like consumers are still out there spending, which is the most important component of GDP. Like consumer spending is 70% of GDP growth. So like things are still relatively okay, but because of the pandemic, some of the prints are funky.
Quarter over quarter, year over year, kind of.
Quarter over quarter, yeah. So like if you look back to Q4 2021, like that was a pretty big GDP print, and it's just hard to match that every time. Yeah.
Right. God, there goes my brain.
No, let's let him figure it out. If you throw him a life preserver.
Oh no, I know what I was gonna say. It reminds me of one of those, kind of like how the creator of the term GIF originally coined it as GIF,
right? But
then there's some rule that, well, it doesn't matter because once society decides how a word is pronounced, that's just how it's actually pronounced. Yeah. And he gave it up. He said, "Yeah, I said it was pronounced GIF."
Yeah, but he was wrong. I don't want to get into that.
That's true. He was.
It stands for, what does it stand for?
Graphic interface.
So you're starting with G.
Graphic. Sure. Yeah. Anyway, does it matter? If everybody's pre-existing notion of a recession is the 2 quarters of consecutive negative growth, when that does happen, and then it just... Do you get what I'm getting
people's
at?
brains are breaking right now for sure. Yeah. Because like everyone's like, well, I think that we're in one and things are really bad and not good because like the stock market is down so much and because it's so hard to get a home, and like there's such a mismatch in the economic data and reality, right? Like you can't really go to a regular person and be like,
you should be feeling good about yourself because industrial production metrics are strong.
Like that's just like, okay, like no, I shouldn't be.
Don't worry about it. The jobs came back pretty good.
Yeah. And like they have been. And that's part of the problem, is that like a lot of this stuff just doesn't make sense. And if you go to the average person who has experienced, stagnant wages and mega inflation, it's just not going to be comforting to be like.
Not only that, they seem to be kind of preparing everyone for a lot of pain. It was literally just yesterday. It might have been the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. It was this article, like basically anyone younger than 40.
That's us.
Is in for a lot of trouble. Like their jobs are going to be on the line. Like they're going to start culling the herd. I mean, even employers, you had Mark Zuckerberg coming out and talking about
not hiring as much.
They're not only not hiring as much, they're going to get rid of a lot of people. And they said, the culture is going to change a little bit. And he was like, I'm excited about it. We're going to be
leaner.
The people who can't perform in this high-paced thing aren't going to be around anymore, and we're going to see who can sink or swim. So I mean, it's they're putting out this message that like, well, here comes the pain.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think there's two components to that, right? Like the Fed has definitely been prepping people for pain because the Fed is in between like a rock and a hard place right now. Like if they don't act, if they don't do something, like it's going to be super bad in terms of how they're viewed, their credibility. And their credibility is literally what drives most of the impact that they have on the market. So if they lose that, that's a really big deal. And then in terms of like what Zuck is doing, tech is going through a really big trouble right now just because of the broader sell-off in the market. And, people are like, oh, we're going to go into value because it's safer. So a lot of growth stocks have had a big sell-off. And I think Meta, right, like they've not done, the metaverse is sort of.
Just give them time.
Yeah.
I have an Oculus and I never use it.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, of course he's going to want to fire people, like nobody's using his little headset.
Yeah. His little headset. I do think that there are practical applications for it, like for surgeons, for example, to practice doing surgery.
But he went like...
Yeah, but we're not all going to be living and working and shopping.
In the metaverse.
Who was it that just came out with a report that, was it like Credit Suisse or JP Morgan? Someone came out with a report that like, spending in the metaverse is going to exceed $1 trillion.
McKinsey did that, yeah.
Give me a fucking
but, like,
break.
Think about their incentives, right? Like they collect fees from consulting on the metaverse. Yeah. So of course they're going to be like...
Play in the metaverse, everybody. Yeah. Give us money so we can tell you how to do freaking PowerPoints.
On the note of the Fed, I wanted to talk about their credibility. I find it interesting what they're doing now. I think that now, how do I phrase this? They are being so stern and unrelenting in their messaging going forward about we are dedicated to making inflation. We're dedicated to driving
focus
dropping inflation, and they're not going to let up until like momentum is clearly trending downward for inflation. And a lot of people, I think, are going to be mad at them in the interim, including myself. But as you mentioned yesterday, that they do have such a hard job ahead of them, and they have, for the most part, kind of navigated this whole thing since COVID with relative
grace.
Yeah. And because their reputation is so damaged, they cannot afford to be wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I mean, like in the minutes that were released yesterday, they didn't mention financial stability or liquidity, both of which are really big concerns because they're really focused on getting inflation down. But part of the problem with that is the economy is slowing down. So if they go like hot and heavy, raising rates, that's going to be not good if the economy keeps on slowing down already. So the worry is that they will hike us into a recession. And they've hinted at that through saying the word restrictive. Like if they say the word restrictive, that essentially, is an analogy for going into a recession. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But they have to. To a certain extent.
And Michael Burry, I don't know why I'm even referencing. Well, because he's a smart guy, I guess. Yeah, just keep going. Okay. Well, so Michael Burry was saying that who famously just like tweets and then deletes them.
Yeah.
Like, calm down, man. You're like a teenager on Tumblr. Am I right?
Back, baby.
He was tweeting that, we are so hopelessly just tied to everything the Fed does and says.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not an original idea.
No.
My favorite trader, Stan Druckenmiller, has always been. I can't wait. I gotta get him on here. We gotta get him on here.
Yeah, he's good.
He's so lovely. He seems like a real down to earth guy. Started from nothing, and now he's here. But he says stuff
much like Drake.
Much like Drake.
Jeff Bezos, did you see that?
No.
Jeff Bezos commented on Drake's Instagram post.